For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 530, the ACES Act, as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 530, a bill to provide for a study by the National Academies of the Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine on the prevalence and mortality of cancer among individuals who served as active duty aircrew in the armed forces and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman, and the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. McGarvey, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 530 as amended.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 530 as amended. The bill was introduced by my friend and fellow veteran, Representative Pfluger. This bill would ensure there is trusted medical research available to pave the way for toxic exposed military pilots and aircrew to assess their VA disability compensation benefits. As someone who served as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, I am troubled by how many times I have heard from my fellow aviators that military pilots and air crewmen appear to be diagnosed with cancer at much higher rates than civilians. Colonel Andrew Shurtleff, who testified before the House Veterans Affairs Committee in March, is one of those veterans. He served our country as an Air Force fighter pilot, and he started fighting stage 4 cancer in 2019 when he was just 41 years old. My prayers are with him as he continues to battle cancer, and I wish him the very best. Military pilots and air crewmen across the service branches, like Colonel Shurtleff, are exposed to chemicals and toxic fumes in confined spaces every time they fly a mission. However, there is not enough medical research available for VA to simply presume that their cancers are related to those exposures. That makes it much harder for them to access their earned VA benefits. Each one of those veterans has to prove to the VA that chemicals and toxins cause their cancer. Many have had to fight the VA system for years before they received any disability compensation, and many others never received their earned benefits before they passed away. H.R. 530 as amended would ensure that the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine conducts a study on whether the cancers suffered by military pilots and their aircrew are related to their chemical and toxic exposures. VA needs robust medical research to streamline military aircrew veterans' access to disability compensation, and VA needs it fast for today and tomorrow's veterans. My friend from Texas bill would ensure that research gets done and that our military pilots and air crewmen get the answers they deserve. I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 530 as amended. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to express my support for H.R. 530, the ACES Act. As amended, a bill that would task the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine with studying the frequency and mortality of cancer among individuals who served as aircrew in the armed forces. I can't help but think of some of the giants of aviation our country has had. Admiral James Stockdale, Chuck Yeager, John McCain, the groundbreaking women Air Force service pilots, or WASPs, of World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen, our astronauts, including the crew of Apollo 11. As a nation, we've been lucky that people of this caliber have stepped up and stepped into the cockpit. These veterans are some of the best our nation has to offer. They are expertly trained to maintain, fly, and fight their airframes. Aviators get the mission done, and they get it done no matter what, under pressure, under fire, under hostile conditions in the wind and the rain, sometimes even landing on a boat in the middle of the ocean in the dead of night with no lights. 365 days a year, they are out there keeping us safe. Military aviators do it all, and they do it better than anyone else. Unfortunately, there's a concerning trend among veteran aviators and air crews. they're seeing troubling rates of cancer. Initial studies have shown increased rates of melanoma and pancreatic, prostate, brain, and thyroid cancers. The air crew community also shows alarming diagnoses of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We have both a legal and a moral obligation to take care of our veterans. Unfortunately, these veteran aviators are not getting the recognition they need and deserve from the VA. Often, these folks are forced to use their network of fellow veterans to share tips and tricks to get their care. They move through this new medical world with the gut feeling that they all could not be ill without their military occupation playing some role. This is unacceptable. We need data to help bridge the gap between anecdote and evidence for aviator cancers so pilots and air crews can get the care and the benefits they deserve. That's what this bill hopes to achieve. So I strongly support it. I thank the gentleman from Texas for bringing the bill for his service and encourage all of my colleagues to get behind this effort. And while this is one affected community, we cannot forget the countless other veterans and families also fighting for their toxic exposures to be seen and addressed. I'm thinking especially about my constituents who were stationed at Camp Lejeune, or the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile or ICBM community, who suffer from cancer rates above nationwide averages, or those who were exposed to radiation while working at the Nevada Test and Training Range, and veterans exposed to fuels in their water and molds in their walls while they lived in on-base housing during their service. These are all veterans who continue to carry hidden wounds from service that often don't show up until years after they take the uniform off. As we learn of these communities with toxic exposure and illness beyond battle, we need to make sure that we have adequate systems in place to take care of them. This means a fully staffed and funded Department of Veterans Affairs. This means mental health professionals are in place to assist these veterans through traumatic and life-changing diagnoses. This means updated infrastructure in place to care for these veterans. And for those who succumb to their diagnosis, this means a fully functioning VA to provide end-of-life care with dignity and compassion. Lastly, it means a VA to deliver for those survivors left behind, those who carry on through the pain and grief. I am thankful to all of those who have worked tirelessly to bring this issue to the attention of Congress. The ACES Act is definitely a step in the right direction. It's not a fix-all, but it will give affected veterans a fighting chance. And in the near future, I hope we can do the same for so many other worthwhile populations as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this legislation and ask my colleagues to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now recognize my esteemed colleague from Texas, Representative Pfluger, Air Force pilot, and truly a person who understands and cares the subject matter of this bill for as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today not just as a congressman, but as a service member and a friend to advocate on behalf of veterans and service members fighting a second battle that they never signed up to fight for. This is in support of H.R. 530, my legislation called the ACES Act, the Aviator Cancers Examination Study. And I want to first thank the gentleman from Michigan for being willing to give his life and serving in the military as a helicopter pilot. I want to thank Chairman Bost. I want to thank the ranking member and the majority leader, Mr. Scalise. You know, military aviators and crew members are tragically and unfortunately being diagnosed with various forms of cancer at alarming rates. According to a 2021 Air Force study and subsequent Department of Defense research, our aviators have a 29% greater probability of testicular cancer, a 24% higher probability of melanoma, 23% higher risk of prostate cancer compared to the normal civilian population. And those aren't the only forms. These aren't just statistics, they're real lives, real families, real sacrifices. And when brave men and women volunteer to defend our nation from the cockpit, they shouldn't face a second battle against cancer without our full support. This is why my legislation is so important. The ACES Act directs the Department of Veteran Affairs to partner with the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a comprehensive study on cancer prevalence among military aviators and identify the agents, the chemicals, the compounds, and the mechanisms in aviation environments that may be causing these elevated rates of cancer. By identifying specific risk factors unique to aviation environments, we can develop targeted screening protocols for early detection when treatment is most effective. And this means faster access to benefits and treatment for those diagnosed without the burden of proving their cancer resulted from their service. If every aviator received specialized cancer screenings based on their specific exposure risks, countless lives would be saved. To put this study's profound impact into perspective, picture this: a melanoma caught early and treated and cured sends a mom back to her family. Prostate cancer found before it spreads allows a doctor ample time to set up proper and more likely successful treatment plans. A testicular tumor found and removed in a routine screening designed for pilots versus in an emergency room situation gives the dad a chance to eat around the table with his family for years to come. This is what ACES makes possible. As an Air Force fighter pilot myself for 20 plus years, I've fought alongside the best the nation has to offer, but I've also stood in hospital rooms watching far too many of my brothers and sisters fight their toughest battles, not in the air, but in the hospital rooms against cancer. And today I'm honored to be joined by a group of extraordinary heroes from our Air Force and our Navy, Americans who have raised their hand in support of our nation and volunteered to serve as pilots. These patriots who defended our skies are now fighting for their lives. The ACES Act is for them. It's for the families of those fighting who spend countless hours at the hospital and treatment centers and surrender everything to care for their loved ones and keep hope alive. It's for those that we've already lost, whose names we will always remember, who I will always remember in my heart. And it's for my dear friend, Colonel Andy Pablo Shurtleff, an F-22 fighter pilot, a brother in arms who at this very moment is fighting for his life against cancer. In March, Colonel Shurtleff testified before the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, sharing how a promising career was cut short after a sudden diagnosis. And he explained that the earlier understanding of what causes cancer among pilots could have led to an earlier diagnosis in him, one that could have very well been instrumental in his treatment. The ACES Act has the support of over 20 veterans organizations, cancer advocacy groups, and medical experts because they recognize what's at stake. This isn't a partisan issue. It's about fulfilling a promise that our country made to those who are willing to serve, a promise that when someone serves our nation, we will serve them in return. Every day we wait means more aviators receiving life-altering diagnoses without understanding why, more families devastated by uncertainty, and more veterans fighting for the care they deserve. It's time to acknowledge the true cost of aviation service. The ACES Act is not just a bill. It's a lifeline for those who have already given so much for our freedom. It's a moral obligation, and it's a message to every pilot who's ever put on that flight suit to protect our skies, that we see you and we hear you, that we're here to also do the right thing. You know, when I signed up to run for Congress, this issue was on my heart. When I signed up as a member of the Air Force, I didn't know that this was a potential issue. But there are groups out there like the River Rats, led by so many amazing pilots, men and women who were ready to give their lives, who are now trying to do the right thing. Mr. Aztec, Vince Alcazar, is one of those people who has really led on this issue. And I know that both my colleague from Michigan and myself, the ranking member, we know lots of people who were in a situation and are in a situation now that the ACES Act is that lifeline. I want to urge my colleagues in the Senate that once we pass this on the House floor today, I want to urge my colleagues in the Senate to do the right thing, to act this week. Let's send H.R. 530 to the President's desk this week and have it signed into law. Let's do something that many Americans think isn't possible, and that's act with speed inside the U.S. Congress. Let's keep our mock-up and do the right thing and send this to the Senate, get it passed, and get it to the President's door. I want to thank the chairman of the House VA Committee, Mr. Bost, and the Majority Leader, Mr. Steve Scalise, for acting with speed, for acting aggressively and keeping their mock-up, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation and yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers and am prepared to close. I reserve.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Speaker, once again, I encourage all members to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Pfluger, for bringing this bill, for your service to our country before coming to Congress, and for acting on behalf of all of our aviators who have taken off the uniform and are now fighting a different battle. This bill is important for everyone who has ever climbed into or out of a cockpit in our United States military to keep us free. It will benefit every veteran. And I'm excited for the veterans in Louisville, Kentucky, where we have a lot of former aviators as the home of UPS's World Hub. This will help everyone, including those people in Louisville, Kentucky. I urge my colleagues to support this bill that not only is happening quickly, but I will also note is happening with bipartisan support. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 530 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill. For what purpose the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
On that, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. After a sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1912, the Veteran Fraud Reimbursement Act of 2025.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1912, a bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to improve the repayment by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of benefits misused by a fiduciary and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman, and the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. McGarvey, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 1912.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1912, introduced by my colleague, Representative Conley from Virginia. My prayers are with him and his family as he battles cancer once again. I thank the leadership teams, especially Leader Scalise and his staff, for agreeing to move this bill forward in his absence. Representative Conley's bill would ensure that VA's fiduciary program is improved so that our nation's most veterans receive the benefits that they have earned. And let me say that again, our most vulnerable veterans. VA appoints fiduciaries for veterans who are unable to manage their VA financial benefits. These fiduciaries are required to use a veteran's VA benefits for the veteran's care and welfare. VA periodically reviews fiduciary activities to ensure that fiduciaries are not misusing a veteran's VA benefits. But when a fiduciary misuses a veteran's benefits, current law does not allow the veteran to be made financially whole until after VA determines whether the misuse was the result of VA negligence. These negligent determinations of negligence, amount to bureaucratic red tape that have caused long delays before veterans could recoup their misused benefits. Some veterans have passed away before their misused benefits are returned. We must ensure that VA's fiduciary program is streamlined. This bill would get rid of red tape preventing victims of misuse from promptly recouping their VA benefits. It would prohibit VA from withholding repayment of misused benefits while VA is still working on a negligence determination. It would also require VA to implement methods to ensure that negligence determinations are made in a timely manner. Veterans deserve to have access to their benefits without bureaucratic hurdles and unnecessary delays. I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 1912. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to express my support for H.R. 1912, the Veteran Fraud Reimbursement Act of 2025, authored by my colleague, Representative Connolly. Representative Connolly cannot be here today as he bravely battles cancer, and our thoughts and prayers are with him. I echo the comments of Representative Bergman. Veterans in the fiduciary program are some of the most vulnerable in the VA's care. Because they are often elderly or mentally ill, they are at greater risk for financial abuse and theft of benefits than the population at large. And, unfortunately, despite the VA's best efforts at vetting proposed fiduciaries, bad actors do arise from time to time. When that happens, theft or misuse of benefits can financially devastate veterans. On top of the financial harm, the strain of being taken advantage of can further eat away at the veteran's physical and mental health. We must empower the VA to more quickly return stolen or misused benefits to veterans who are exploited by their fiduciary. This bill would do just that. It passed the House last Congress, and I encourage my colleagues to support it again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no further speakers and prepared to close. I reserve.
No,
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Yeah, Speaker, once again, I encourage all members to support this legislation and send our colleague, Mr. Connolly, our best wishes and prayers, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan yields his balance of his time, and now the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also ask my colleagues to join me in passing H.R. 1912, the Veteran Fraud Reimbursement Act of 2025. And before I yield back, I do want to express my deepest appreciation and admiration for the sponsor of this bill, Representative Connolly. Representative Connolly has been a faithful and passionate servant of the American people for decades, both through his time as a congressional staffer and then as a representative of his beloved state of Virginia. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today. Anybody who knows Representative Connolly knows he's a bulldog. He is a fighter. He's tenacious. He's facing some serious health challenges right now. And Mr. Speaker, I know you will join me and Representative Bergman and everyone else in wishing him the absolute best as he's in this fight. I know he's got it, and we're with him. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1912? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to consider is laid on the table. The gentleman from Florida seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1503.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1503, a bill to combat forced organ harvesting and trafficking in persons for purposes of the removal of organs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mass, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski, Each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous materials on this measure.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record exchange of letters with other committees of referral on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we gather today to confront one of the most unconscionable human rights atrocities of our time. It's amazing that we have to speak about this. The state-sponsored forced harvesting of human organs. Innocent people, often prisoners of conscience, are being killed so that their vital organs can be removed and sold. This is a billion-dollar black market built on murder. It's a direct assault on every principle of human dignity and decency. H.R. 1503, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2025, is a bipartisan moral imperative. It holds perpetrators accountable and targets the heart of this depraved industry. The bill sends a clear message: the United States will not be complicit. If you take part in forced organ harvesting, we are coming after you. It imposes strong sanctions, strengthens reporting requirements, and authorizes the denial and revocation of passports for convicted traffickers who cross borders to commit these crimes. I would say that's the least that we could be doing. The legislation rightly identifies those responsible, including members of the Chinese Communist Party, who have been credibly accused by human rights organizations and UN experts for orchestrating systemic, state-run organ harvesting, primarily targeting prisoners of conscience from religious and ethnic minority groups. This is not speculation. The evidence is overwhelming. International investigations, eyewitness testimony, and growing data confirm that these abuses are occurring on a massive scale. They are crimes against humanity. The bill is a necessary tool to fight that evil. It aligns our foreign policy with our core values: human rights, rule of law, and the sanctity of life. And as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I am proud to support it. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Smith of New Jersey, and Mr. Keating of Massachusetts for leading this bipartisan effort. The bill passed the Foreign Affairs Committee with broad bipartisan support, and I urge my colleagues to join in advancing it on the floor today. We must make it unmistakably clear: forced organ harvesting will not be tolerated. Will not be tolerated in this world, and those who carry it out, support it, or profit from it will face serious consequences. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1503, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to thank Representatives Smith and Keating for introducing this bill, which, as the chairman mentioned, passed in the 118th Congress. I also want to thank my colleague and chairman for bringing this and many other important bipartisan bills to the floor today. According to the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, the trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal is one of the least reported and least understood forms of trafficking, but one that experts believe may be growing. Like sex trafficking and labor trafficking, it is ultimately a crime that exploits human beings for economic profit. The State Department's 2023 Human Rights Report highlights troubling allegations regarding the government of the People's Republic of China forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, including religious and spiritual adherents. Mr. Speaker, I worry deeply about the administration's proposed State Department's reorganization plans that would gut the funding and experts working to address these crimes, giving the PRC and others a pass. Instead of these cuts, the administration should be strengthening efforts to address forced organ harvesting and trafficking. H.R. 1503 shines a light on this horrible practice and calls on the State Department to make its annual reporting on the issue more robust and more in-depth. Not only does it call for more regular assessments of the problem, it also authorizes the imposition of sanctions on individuals that are involved in forced organ harvesting or trafficking. The legislation will make sure the U.S. is carefully gathering all the facts to make an informed assessment on the magnitude and prevalence of this problem and developing appropriate responses. The trafficking of persons for the purpose of organ removal is a form of trafficking in which an individual is exploited for their organs, including by coercion, deception, and abuse of a position of vulnerability. It's abhorrent, repugnant, and dehumanizing. I support this legislation and urge all of my colleagues to likewise support it again this Congress. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 6 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the sponsor of this legislation and the chairman of the Subcommittee on Africa, Mr. Smith.
The gentleman from New Jersey is
Thank
recognized
you
for 6
very
minutes.
much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, the distinguished chairman, for his support and for yielding this time. Mr. Speaker, every year under Xi Jinping and his Chinese Communist Party, tens of thousands of young women and men, average age 28, are murdered in cold blood to steal their internal organs for profit or to be transplanted into Communist Party cadres, leaders, and members alike. These crimes against humanity are unimaginably cruel and painful. Between 2 and 6 internal organs per victim are extracted. It is murder masquerading as medicine. Ethnic groups targeted include Uyghurs, who suffer from Xi Jinping's ongoing genocide, and the Falun Gong, whose peaceful meditation and exercise practices and exceptional good health make their organs highly desirable. The Chinese Communist Party has declared the Falun Gong practitioners to be an evil cult, fit for butchering. Mr. Speaker, over the years, I have chaired several hearings on this barbaric abuse. And 2 years ago, on March 27th, the House passed my bill, the Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2023, 413 to 2. Like many other House-passed bills, however, it died in the Senate. If approved today, I respectfully appeal to the Senate to pass it this time. Special thanks to Majority Leader Scalise, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Meeks for ensuring reconsideration in this new Congress, and special thanks to Bill Keating for co-sponsoring. Mr. Speaker, I have chaired several hearings over the years on forced organ harvesting, beginning over a quarter of a century ago. In June of 1998, 27 years ago, I chaired my first hearing on forced organ harvesting in China. A Chinese security officer who testified that he and other security agents were executing patients with the doctors right there, the ambulances right there, ready to put them in the back to take their organs after the bullets were fired. At one hearing in September of 2015, Ethan Gutman, a true expert, author of the book The Slaughter, Mass Killings, Organ Harvesting, and China's Secret Solution to its Dissident Problem, and he's testified more than a half a dozen times before our hearings. He pointed out in 1994, the first live organ harvest of death row prisoners was performed on the execution grounds of Xinjiang in northwest China. He points out that over the years, it just kept building, growing, and then that by the year 2005, the apparatus was in place in order to systematically slaughter all of these wonderful people in order to take their organs. Ethan Gutman today says that the prisoners in Xinjiang are being harvested at a rate that translates annually, every year, into 25,000 to 50,000 victims. 25 to 50,000 Uyghurs alone, Kazakhs and other Central Asians. And he also points out that if you use the lower number, we're talking about 175,000 murdered victims, all young people, for their organs in a very, very short period of time. The Falun Dafa information, which does a lot of good work for the Falun Gong, too, points out, while it's very hard to get precise information, it is a dictatorship in a closed society, they said the number had jumped even by 2018 to 20,000 victims. At another hearing, forced organ harvesting in China, we heard expert testimony from Sir Jeffrey Nice, who conducted the first global independent legal analysis of forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience in China. Sir Jeffrey Nice said, and I quote him, "Forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale." He said Falun Gong and the Uyghurs and the PRC each qualify as a group for purposes of the crime of genocide. Robert Destro, the Assistant Secretary for State and Democracy and Human Rights, testified as well at that hearing and said, the size and scope of organ harvesting and organ trafficking market are staggering. Mr. Speaker, we also know that there are hospitals dedicated just to dealing and helping to assist Chinese Communist Party leaders. And where do they get there? One of them is the Army Hospital 301 in Beijing. And where do they get these victims? From the very group of people that they hate so much, the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong and some others. We've introduced again this year, the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act to amend the Foreign Assistance Act to require the imposition of serious sanctions on any person the President determines funds, sponsors, or otherwise facilitates forced organ harvesting or trafficking for purposes of the removal of organs. If enacted into law, it requires very comprehensive reporting on this, which has not happened. It needs to happen. So what does all this mean, really? It means civil penalties of up to $250,000 and criminal penalties, including a fine of up to $1 million and imprisonment for not more than 20 years or both. So, Mr. Speaker, we are serious about sanctioning this egregious human rights abuse. Sanctions also include blocking and prohibiting all transactions in property and interest in property, and making ineligible to come to this country if they're a foreigner a visa. State-sponsored forced organ harvesting is big business for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, and we will not rest and we cannot rest until we stop it. I want to thank the organizations to my left, a group of 9 organizations, there's 10, another one has joined in, to call for passage and support for this bill. These are great human rights organizations. Again, we must act now, we must act decisively. The lives of so many lie in the balance. I yield back to my good friend, any balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back. The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No further requests for time. I'm prepared to close if the other side has no speakers.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I have no more speakers. Did he yield back?
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may use for the purpose of closing. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1503 is an important bipartisan measure. We know that organ harvesting has been a problem in different places around the globe. We don't know yet the full extent of the problem, and it's certainly a practice that is difficult to detect and track. But the bill before us is a strong and important step forward. It calls on the State Department to provide important information to Congress, to the American public, and to the world about the global scope of organ harvesting and trafficking. This bill will help inform Congress so that we can ensure the U.S. can respond appropriately. I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the United States has to lead with moral clarity. We have to send an unmistakable message. The human body is not a currency. It's not a commodity. It's never for sale. Forced organ harvesting is pure evil, and if we don't act, then we'll be considered complicit. I urge every one of my colleagues to stand firm for human dignity and support H.R. 1503, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1503? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection.
It's a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman request the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1512 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1512, a bill to amend the Taiwan Assurance Act of 2020 to require periodic reviews and updated reports relating to the Department of State's Taiwan guidelines.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mass, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today in support of my colleague, Ms. Wagner, and in support of the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act. This bill reaffirms and strengthens the United States' commitment to Taiwan, one of our most important democratic partners in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan is under growing pressure from an increasingly aggressive Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping has made no secret of his intentions. Folding Taiwan into the People's Republic of China is central to his vision of national rejuvenation, and he's made it clear that he's willing to use force to make that happen. The warning signs are in plain view. China is ramping up aerial incursions, conducting illegal exercises that simulate a blockade around Taiwan, threatening sanctions against Taiwanese industries, and relentlessly targeting Taipei with economic and political intimidation. If we're serious about countering the CCP's ambition to displace the United States as a global leader, then we have to act with clarity and conviction. That starts with standing firm alongside Taiwan. We need to deepen our economic, security, and diplomatic cooperation with Taiwan, and do so transparently and without apology. Unfortunately, under the Biden administration, the State Department has too often handcuffed U.S.-Taiwan engagement by clinging to outdated, self-imposed restrictions and bureaucratic red tape, weakening a vital partnership at a time when unity and strength are urgently needed. That is unacceptable. The Taiwan Assurance Act passed with bipartisan support in 2020, but the stakes are even higher today. That's why this bill updates and strengthens the original law, ensuring that U.S. policy toward Taiwan reflects today's strategic reality, not yesterday's hesitations. By removing self-imposing limitations on how we engage with Taiwan, we send a clear message to Beijing. The United States stands with free nations, and we will not be bullied into silence. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1512 and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
In the 118th Congress, this body came together to overwhelmingly pass this bipartisan measure from Representatives Wagner, Conley, and Liu, 404 to 7, and I see no reason why today's vote should be any less supportive. It is critical that the United States shows unwavering support for our friend Taiwan in the face of the PRC's persistent use of economic, political, and military coercion against it. Just last month, the PRC conducted large-scale drills in the waters and airspace around Taiwan in a dangerous and destabilizing show of force. I heard these concerns reinforced recently during a congressional visit to the Pacific countries. Under such tense circumstances, we must work to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait by bolstering deterrence and redoubling our commitment to the U.S. One China policy. While providing Taiwan the weapons to defend itself, we must also strengthen our unofficial relationship with Taiwan in the cultural and economic space and build resilience in Taiwan against PRC gray zone tactics. Since 1979, in order to build a bilateral relationship with China, our government has maintained internal executive department guidelines to limit official interactions with Taiwan consistent with our One China policy. This bill simply directs the executive to report the guidelines to Congress every 5 years so that Congress is aware of them. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentlelady from Missouri, the sponsor of this legislation, Ms. Wagner.
The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my bill, H.R. 1512, the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act. Mr. Speaker, it is undeniable that the People's Republic of China is the single gravest threat to our national security. It is undeniable that China has increased its destabilizing military activities in the Pacific. And it is undeniable that China has its sights set on the full-scale invasion of Taiwan. The United States must not waver in our deterrence of this threat and our support for this nation. Just last month, the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command testified to Congress that China escalated military pressure against Taiwan by 300% last year. Commander Paparo explicitly warned that these, and I quote, aggressive maneuvers around Taiwan are not just exercises, they are dress rehearsals for forced unification. It is imperative that the full weight of the United States stands firmly and publicly against these provocations. For decades, our nation employed a strategy of opacity, restricting our formal engagement with Taiwan to avoid upsetting or insulting the Chinese Communist Party. In 2020, this body enacted the Taiwan Assurance Act, and the first Trump administration moved decisively to implement this new policy by declaring all self-imposed restrictions null and void. Unfortunately, the Biden administration waffled and rolled back many of these diplomatic standards. And under my legislation, all administrations now and into the future will be required to periodically update these regulations, specifically with the goal of deepening and expanding the U.S.-Taiwan relations. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with our partners in the Pacific to deter the Chinese threat. And I am proud to say that enacting this legislation, the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act, will be a decisive step forward to ensuring peace through strength. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close by acknowledging my close friend and co-lead of this legislation, Congressman Jerry Conley. Congressman Conley is a respected voice of authority on this issue and a tireless champion for the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. It has been an absolute honor to work with the Congressman on this and so many other issues. Jerry, you and your entire family remain in our prayers. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I'm prepared to close if the other side has no speakers, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Reserve. Prepared to close.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you. I yielded myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Mr. Speaker, Taiwan is a friend and a fellow democracy that we should continue to engage with warmth and respect. The United States needs a Taiwan policy that works for U.S. and Taiwan while upholding our long-standing One China policy, which has kept Taiwan safe for over 4 decades. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman here is back. Gentleman from Florida is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, Taiwan is not just a partner. It is a front line for democracy, and how we treat our friends in times of pressure defines our credibility around the globe. If we're serious about countering the CCP, we have to pass this piece of legislation. I urge all members to vote for H.R. 1512, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1512 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Hearing none. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. First, does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 36.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 36, a bill to counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party, the Iranian regime, and the Russian Federation in the nation of Georgia.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the Republic of Georgia was once a prime contender for NATO and an ally of the United States, especially following Russia's 2008 invasion. The United States benefited from military and intelligence cooperation, and the Georgian people are well known for their pro-American sentiment. Unfortunately, our bilateral relationship with Georgia has been eroded by the ruling Georgia Dream Party's moves that mimic Russia's authoritarian tactics, as well as their rapprochement with China and Iran. The opportunities provided by pro-Western democratic Georgia are manifest. Georgia's strategic location on the Black Sea makes it a pivotal nation for trade through the Middle Corridor to Central Asia and can be a counterbalance to Iran and Russian influence in the region. I support this bipartisan bill introduced by Mr. Wilson because it takes an America First approach to the Republic of Georgia. This bill will impose sanctions on regime officials for their roles in undermining Georgia's sovereignty and pro-Western trajectory, as well as review our bilateral relationship, including assistance programs, and require a report that spotlights Russian intelligence actions in Georgia. However, this bill also provides Georgia with an alternative. Once the President certifies that Georgia has returned to its pro-Western trajectory, it promises enhanced people-to-people ties, military cooperation, and encourages an improved bilateral relationship. The United States should reward partners for good behavior. This bill is not an attack on the Georgian people. It seeks to support them by punishing rogue officials who are taking them further away from the United States. The House Foreign Affairs Committee favorably marked up a version of this bill during the last Congress, where it passed with a strong majority, and I expect it will receive the similar support today. I urge my colleagues to support this pragmatic approach to foreign policy and support this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 36, a bipartisan bill designed to make sure the U.S. remains committed to Georgia's Euro-Atlantic and democratic aspirations. I thank my friend, Representative Wilson, for his tireless effort on this topic, in addition to his fervent work to support Ukraine. For years following the fall of communism, and particularly after the Rose Revolution in 2003, the people of Georgia have worked to successfully build their democracy and their economy, all while fostering aspirations to join the EU and NATO. The U.S., along with European partners, have played an integral role in ensuring that the path of integration was open to Georgia and that its people had the means to implement the necessary reforms. Georgia's story has been one of success. Georgia, strategically located on the Black Sea, is no stranger to larger geopolitical forces. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 during the Beijing Olympics and proceeded to occupy 20% of its territory. Despite the persistent threat from Russia, Georgians continue to forge forward with democratic reforms and even made significant contributions to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as this legislation notes. However, we know too well from the experience in other parts of Europe and at home that democratic progress is fragile and requires constant attention. In February 2023, the Georgian government introduced a foreign agents bill in its parliament it claimed was aimed at transparency. However, the bill was set to impose burdensome restrictions on civil society organizations and independent media, stigmatizing them as foreign agents. Following warnings from the U.S. and partners in Europe, as well as waves of protests, the government withdrew the bill, only to reintroduce it in April of 2024. This time, despite massive protests, a presidential veto, additional rebukes from the U.S. Congress, the Biden administration, and the EU, the Georgian parliament pushed through this legislation. Then, in another illustration of democratic backsliding, parliamentary elections were held in the fall of 2024 that were neither free nor fair and tainted by numerous and serious electoral violations. This legislation is a response to the deteriorating democratic situation in Georgia. It will let the Georgian people know that we stand by them in their quest for democracy, respect their rights, and deeper integration into the Euro-Atlantic community. This also provides a framework for appropriate cooperation with the Georgian government going forward. I'm pleased with the bipartisan work of this bill, look forward to its passage, and hope that it has the desired effect to show the people of Georgia that Congress is watching, the United States cares, and we want to ensure your future in Europe and NATO. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is now recognized again.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Wilson.
From South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Brian Mast, and thank you for your leadership on behalf of the American people, and thank you, Madam Chair. I am grateful for the bipartisan endorsement of this legislation. It's bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, it's bicameral, Senate and House, and the MEGOBARI bill, which promotes the people of the very brave people of the Republic of Georgia. For more than 155 days, the freedom-loving people of Georgia have peacefully taken to the streets in defense of the future and soul of their nation. They drape themselves in the flags of the United States and carry posters of our President Donald Trump as an indication of their love and affection for freedom and democracy. Their will is clear. They will not allow the illegal regime of the corrupt Besnisa Ivanishvili to drive their country into ruin and be a dependency of the failed Soviet Union. Georgia is a Black Sea nation that has always prized its hard-won freedom. Sadly, the will of the people is being subverted by the illegitimate Georgian Dream regime, an American-hating mafia cabal that seeks to sell the country to U.S. adversaries, including the Chinese Communist Party, giving away practically a port on the Black Sea that should be for the people of Georgia. Also subservient to the regime in Tehran that we know launched attacks against Israel just yesterday, and war criminal Putin, who seeks to make indeed the people of Georgia subservient. The Georgian people are among the bravest and most pro-American in the world. I have had the opportunity with 3 of my sons serving with Georgian troops across the world in Afghanistan and Iraq to see how brave and capable the troops are of Georgia. Georgian troops have fought alongside American troops in the global war on terrorism and has no limits on their assignments that they would undertake bravely and competently. In 2020, I was grateful to lead the Republican Study Committee National Security Report under then Chairman, now Speaker Mike Johnson, calling for sanctions on Ivanishvili. Georgian Dream has moved swiftly to criminalize association with America since the election of October 26. It rejected bids by American companies for construction of their strategic deep-sea port to the Chinese Communist Party. Every major building contract over $100 million U.S. have been awarded to the Chinese Communist Party or affiliated companies, or state-owned companies of the Chinese Communist Party. This blocks America from the Middle Corridor and cuts off land access to critical minerals in Central Asia, which additionally want to be friends of America and friends of Western civilization. The regime peddles in daily anti-American propaganda accusing top officials of the U.S. government, including President Trump and the very appreciated Senate Foreign Affairs Chairman Jim Risch, of corruption as acting as tools of the deep state. In fact, just last week, there was a statement by a government official that Donald Trump was a tool of the deep state. As Trump administration State Department spokesman Tammy Bruce said, quote, regarding the continuing anti-democratic actions taken by the Georgian Dream government, as Vice President J.D. Vance said in Munich, you cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be part of our shared society, end of quote. This bill provides for sanctions against Georgian Dream thugs for their illegal actions. It also provides for stronger bilateral ties after confirmation of Georgia's return to adherence to its Constitution. I urge support for this legislation for the mutual benefit of the people of Georgia and the people of the United States. I yield back.
The gentleman yields.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. Now the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Representative Steve Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Georgia has long been a great friend of the United States. I went to Georgia for their election when they elected the Dream ticket, the Georgia Dream. The about 12 years ago. But the Georgia dream has turned into a Georgia nightmare. In Georgia and America, Dr. King had a dream, and that dream still lives. But the dream in Georgia, the country, is no longer alive and is pulling that country closer to our adversaries. The illegitimate Georgia Dream Party, led by Ivanishvili, rigged the 2024 election, and they truly did rig it in that situation, and has been facing mass protests ever since. Every Sunday there are mass protests in Georgia, protesting deprivation of freedoms and liberties. The Georgia Dream has orchestrated crackdowns on citizens, including banning the freedom of speech and assembly in Georgia, using violence against protesters, and abusing the court process to wrongfully imprison and charge protesters. The Georgian people have protested for over 150 consecutive days and still protesting today, especially on Sundays. They're calling for free and fair elections and the release of political prisoners. The United States has long supported freedom in Georgia and now is no different. The MEGOBARI Act is an expression of that support. As ranking member of the Helsinki Commission, I'm proud to be the lead Democrat on the MEGOBARI bill, along with my friend Joe Wilson. This act will evaluate all Georgia Dream officials for sanctions. If they're found to have undermined Georgian democracy or engaged in corruption, they will be sanctioned. It also creates a report on Russian intelligence assets, in Georgia, and Russia-China cooperation to undermine Georgia's sovereignty. What's going on is basically a revolution where Ivanishvili, who runs the party and has investments in Russia, is trying to bring them closer to Russia and Putin. Lastly, the bill envisions a stronger U.S.-Georgia relationship once Georgia returns to its traditional Euro-Atlantic path mandated in its own constitution and demanded by its people. I want to thank Congressman Wilson and the other co-leads on this important legislation, Congressman Veazey and Hudson. I urge its passage, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Representative Davidson.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I thank the chairman, and Madam Speaker, I generally support everything that the chairman supports. This is a wrong-headed bill. Our colleagues need to say no to this. The American people did not send us here to expand America's security blanket to more parts of the world. We don't have to get involved in every conflict we're invited to, and we certainly don't need to seek out extra ones. We can wish the people of Georgia well without expanding our commitment to be Europe's defense force. We've got a blank check to defend countries that, admittedly, Georgia can't really defend themselves well against Russia. They're not even spending 2% of their money, of their GDP, on defense in the current state. That's a minimum for admission to NATO. You couldn't blame them for thinking that it doesn't really matter, because even the biggest countries like Germany haven't historically hit that threshold either. But their economy isn't that big, so even if they were spending more, it wouldn't matter. This is the wrong approach to national security, and it also further dilutes the effectiveness of our sanctions regime. I think it's a terrible idea. I think my constituents are wondering, why are we doing this instead of the things that we campaigned on? I hope we get focused on an America First foreign policy. This isn't it. I oppose it, and I urge everyone else to as well. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no further requests for time, and I am prepared to close if the other side has no further speakers. Very good.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Madam Speaker, H.R. 36 works to show the people of Georgia that the United States remains committed to its Euro-Atlantic aspirations and provides a framework for appropriate cooperation with the Georgian government in light of worrying democratic backsliding in the country. I again thank my colleagues for their steadfast support and leadership on this issue and support of Georgia's ambitions to join NATO and the EU, and I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I firmly believe that every country in the world should choose the United States of America as their first partner and our allies over dictatorships like Russia and China. It is essential that these countries walk the walk. American largesse will not be taken advantage of by those who accuse the United States of being part of a global war party or the global deep state. And I urge my colleagues to support this measure and stand with the people of Georgia and an America First foreign policy, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 36? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings of this question will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1486 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1486, a bill to impose sanctions with respect to economic or industrial espionage by foreign adversarial companies and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. will each 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record exchanges of letters with other committees of referral on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, I rise in support for H.R. 1486, the Economic Espionage Prevention Act, introduced by my colleague from Georgia, Mr. McCormick. The Chinese Communist Party is working to undermine America's interests around the world and is the global supplier of America's adversaries. As President Trump and his administration are working tirelessly to finally bring an end to the war in Ukraine, the CCP continues to stoke global chaos by providing massive amounts of industrial and economic support to Russia. In fact, our State Department assessed that in the second half of 2023 alone, China supported the transfer of nearly $300 million worth of semiconductors to Russia, including for use in missiles and drones. The CCP's actions are blatant violations of U.S. export controls and detrimental to our ongoing peace efforts. China's economic and industrial support for Russia is a critical lifeline for the Russian military. This is why it is critical that Congress pass the Economic Espionage Prevention Act. This bill will provide important sanctions authorities for cutting off the CCP's illegal industrial supply chains to America's adversaries. Enhancing U.S. export control enforcement with economic sanctions will help shut down China's massive support for Russia's defense industrial base. This bill also enhances Congressmen's visibility into this illicit supply chain by requiring the State Department to issue a report identifying these individuals and entities who are supporting the Russian defense industrial base. The CCP is relentlessly undermining President Trump's efforts to bring an end to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese companies illegally supplying Russia in violation of U.S. export controls must be subjected to the full weight of our sanctions regime. The bill ensures that the CCP and the world understand that supplying America's adversaries comes with a very severe cost. I urge my colleagues to support this important bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1486. This is legislation that authorizes sanctions against any person or entity that provides material support for Russia's military and industrial defense base. We know that Russia uses missiles, drones, planes, and rocket launchers to wreak havoc on Ukrainian cities and citizens. They do this to overthrow the government, to end democracy in Ukraine, and to seize Ukrainians' territory, to reconstitute a new Soviet Union, or at least a Soviet-like sphere of influence. But Ukrainians have bravely stood up to this unprovoked, unlawful aggression. The Ukrainian military has bravely fought back against the much larger Russian military and has repelled this invasion for years. The United States and its partners and allies have been critical to the defense of Ukraine, and Congress has been instrumental in the support we have provided. As Russia continues to suffer heavy losses and economic hardship from waging this illegal invasion, it has turned to China and even Iran and North Korea for support. We absolutely should be bolstering sanctions not just on Russia's warmongering, but also on its enablers. China has played a crucial role in supporting Russia. Though they have not provided overt military support, they are continuing to provide dual-use goods like industrial tools and semiconductors. At a minimum, given its tendencies to appease Russia rather than pressuring it, the Trump administration must maintain the current posture of deterrence with the existing tools it already has. But the better approach is for this administration to also use the additional tools offered by this legislation to deter further PRC shipments of dual-use goods to Russia. Let me say also, I appreciate Representative McCormick and Chairman Mast for negotiating further changes to this bill last week. I appreciate the bipartisan spirit that went into this legislation and for the work that both Ranking Member Meeks and his team has done on this legislation. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. McCormick.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Mast. Thank you to the minority party for supporting this bill. Since illegally invading Ukraine, the Russian Federation has become reliant on the People's Republic of China for its supply of semiconductors and other critical dual-use technologies. The State Department notified Congress last year that the PRC exports of semiconductors significantly increased in 2023 compared to pre-invasion levels. These semiconductors are critical keys aspects to the Russian war effort, including economic and electronic warfare, command and control, and targeting. These components allow Russia to terrorize Ukrainian civilians with ballistic missile strikes as well. The prevalence of U.S. manufacturing equipment in global semiconductor production means nearly all are subject to U.S. export controls if destined for Russia or Belarus. My bill seeks to reduce Russia's access to these semiconductors by authorizing sanctions on any foreign adversaries that materially support Russia's military and intelligence services, violate U.S. export laws, and steal U.S. intellectual property. It further requires a report on whether China is providing significant support to Russia's military and updates existing law to provide greater flexibility to pursue sanctions against China and other foreign adversaries if they violate these export controls. The PRC may publicly claim that they do not provide material support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but their continued supply of dual-use technology clearly shows otherwise. Cutting off the supply of semiconductors will seriously hamper the Russian war effort and show the world that we will not allow our adversaries to work together to destroy sovereign nations and undermine the international system. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1486, and with that, I yield.
Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No further requests for time, and I am prepared to close at the other side. So, speakers.
Madam Speaker, I have no more speakers.
And I reserve.
All right. Gentleman from Maryland is now
no other
recognized
speakers. I
to
apologize,
close.
Mr. Chairman. I thought you said you had another one. I yield myself as much time as I may need for purposes of closing. Madam Speaker, H.R. 1486 will authorize sanctions on any person or entity that supports Russia's military and defense industrial base. Russia expected to take Kyiv in a matter of days, but it has now been years as brave Ukrainians continue to defend their country and their sovereignty against Russia's illegal invasion. I want to thank my colleague, Representative McCormick, and others for their work on this, as Russia has now had to turn to other nations for material support to continue that invasion, which is why Congress must not only continue our support of Ukraine, but also authorize sanctions on those enabling Russia's war. This is an important bill, and I am proud to support it. I hope we can put forward other legislation like this, including a few bills sponsored by Ranking Member Meeks that have passed with bipartisan support in the past. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time. In closing, I again want to thank Representative McCormick for his bill, as well as the China Select Committee Chairman, Mr. Molinar, and Representative Baumgartner and Lawler for their work to bring this bill to the floor to ensure that we finally end China's support for Russia's defense industrial base. It's a great piece of legislation. I urge all members to support H.R. 1486, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1486 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Okay. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1540.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1540, a bill to provide for the imposition of sanctions with respect to forced organ harvesting within the People's Republic of China and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Shusky, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this issue.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record exchanges of letters with other committees of referral on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 1540, Mr. Perry's Falun Gong Protection Act. For decades, the House of Representatives has been raising alarms about organ harvesting perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. We spoke about it earlier. As United Nations human rights experts stated in 2021, forced organ harvesting in China appears to be targeting specific ethnic, linguistic, or religious minorities held in detention, often without being informed of the reasons for their arrest or being provided arrest warrants. Among those most frequently reported as targets are the Falun Gong practitioners and the Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang province. These detainees, often imprisoned for their beliefs, are subjected to medical procedures that other prisoners are not. Blood draws, organ examinations, ultrasound scans. These are not for their health. These are the results are then entered into a database, turning them into a human inventory for a state-run organ harvesting system. This is barbaric. These crimes, they are abuses by the Chinese Communist Party, and I think we can all agree that they have to come to an end. The legislation before us today, the Falun Gong Protection Act, takes long overdue action to confront this horror. It directs the U.S. government to identify and publicly name individuals and entities involved in forced organ harvesting in China. It imposes targeted sanction under the Global Magnitsky Act, including visa bans, asset freezes against those responsible. It strengthens reporting requirements for the State Department, ensuring that U.S. foreign policy fully accounts for the scope of organ trafficking abuses. Madam Speaker, I urge support of this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may use. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1540. Like H.R. 1503, the Falun Gong Protection Act also imposes sanctions on individuals who knowingly and directly engage in or facilitate the involuntary harvesting of organs within the People's Republic of China, while strengthening reporting requirements regarding this heinous crime. These steps are vital to address the forcible harvesting of organs, a grave violation of human rights and bodily autonomy. The PRC has been accused of forcibly harvesting organs from victims who range from prisoners of conscience, including religious and spiritual adherents, to ethnic minorities. Shining a spotlight on these crimes and the people that perpetrate them while advancing accountability is essential. The reporting requirements in this bill will help us better understand the scope of these terrible abuses and allow us to address them more effectively. This reporting relies on the very offices and experts at the State Department, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the National Institutes of Health that are being gutted currently by the Trump administration. A gift for traffickers and criminals that only illustrates just how dangerous the administration's proposed reorganization and so-called streamlining of government has been for United States national security. The sanctions in this bill may help to hold perpetrators accountable and deter the practice as well. We cannot remain silent in the face of such cruelty. We must stand with the victims, show them they are not forgotten, and ensure that perpetrators face justice. I thank my colleagues for their leadership on this effort and other efforts to tackle this heinous crime. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting the measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr.
Recognized.
Speaker, I am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the sponsor of this legislation, Mr. Perry.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for allowing this bill to come to the floor. I'm here today to urge support of and for H.R. 1540, the Falun Gong Protection Act, a bill I have introduced to confront one of the most egregious, barbaric, medieval human rights atrocities of our current time. As we stand on the precipice of this vote, I ask you to join me in taking a stand against the Chinese Communist Party's systematic persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. Since the early 1990s, the Falun Gong, a spiritual practice rooted in the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance, has been targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. By 1999, Mr. Speaker, an estimated 70 to 100 million people, roughly 5 to 7% of China's population, were practicing Falun Gong. This popularity triggered a brutal response from the CCP, unleashing a campaign of illegal detentions, forced labor, torture, and most horrifically, forced organ harvesting, a practice that amounts to mass murder. On July 20th, 1999, the CCP detained hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and banned their practice outright. Since then, the persecution has only intensified. Multiple studies, including the 2020 report from the Independent Tribunal into Forced Organ Harvesting, have exposed an incomprehensible gap between the number of organ transplants performed in China and the number of registered donors. Mr. Speaker, the math simply doesn't add up, and we all know why. Just think about it. An independent tribunal into forced organ harvesting. An organization literally had to be set up to look into this because China is a closed society, and regardless of what people might think, we're allowed to travel to China. They're not showing you this part. The CCP's secrecy ensures that China remains closed to scrutiny, but the evidence is clear. Falun Gong practitioners are the primary victims of this barbaric organ harvesting system. The tribunal's findings are staggering. They concluded that forced organ harvesting has been committed for years on a massive scale with Falun Gong practitioners as the main source. The report states that the CCP and its leaders have actively incited the persecution, imprisonment, murder, torture, and humiliation of these individuals solely to eradicate their beliefs. This is not just a violation of human rights, it's a crime against humanity. Now here, far away in the United States, many in the organ transplant community are unaware of China's illicit practices, shielded by the CCP's repressive control of information and global propaganda. But the truth is undeniable. The Chinese Communist Party has built an infrastructure to persecute millions, not only Falun Gong practitioners, but also Uyghurs, Tibetans, Christians, and others it deems a threat. The CCP's utter disregard for human life shocks the conscience. This barbaric practice must end, and it must end now. H.R. 1540 is a historic step forward. the first binding commitment by Congress to take decisive legal action against the persecution and forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. This bill imposes sanctions on those who would participate in or facilitate forced organ harvesting in China. It directs the Secretary of State to investigate whether the CCP's actions constitute crimes against humanity or genocide and to report on China's organ transplant policies. It also establishes U.S. policy to reject any cooperation with the PRC's illicit organ transplant industry while the CCP remains in power. Colleagues, this bill paves the way for accountability, sanctions, punishment, and acknowledgement of those complicit in these atrocities. 30 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States cannot continue to stand idly by. We must use our authority. We must use our position as leaders in the world to curb these practices and send a clear message to everybody that not only we will not tolerate this assault on human dignity, on humanity itself, but that no country, that no people should. That is why I urge a vote in favor of H.R. 1540. Let us stand together, not just for Falun Gong practitioners, but for the millions suffering under the CCP's oppression, the tyranny. Let us affirm that the United States will always champion truth, compassion, and tolerance. And I thank
the member from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maryland, you're recognized.
No further requests at this time. Prepare to close.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and we'll reserve until the gentleman yields his time.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1540 will help Congress better understand the scope of organ harvesting and will enable for the sanctioning of individuals who knowingly engage in or facilitate this horrendous crime. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill signals that the United States will not tolerate the use of state violence to extract profit from the bodies of the persecuted. I want to thank my friend, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, along with his bipartisan co-sponsors for their leadership on this critical human rights issue. I urge strong support of this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1540? Those in favor, say aye. All opposed? It's in the opinion of the chair that 2/3 being affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid to the table. For what purpose is the gentleman from Florida seeking recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1724 as amended.
The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 1724, a bill to prohibit the use of funds supporting any activities within the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ocheski, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the No Dollars to Uyghur Forced Labor Act. The Chinese Communist Party is carrying out a campaign of genocide against Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. The evidence documented by human rights organizations, journalists, survivors is overwhelming. Over 1 million people detained, families torn apart, entire communities forced into labor in factories that feed global supply chains. Some of those goods end up right here in the United States, on our shelves, in our homes. The No Dollars for Uyghur Forced Labor Act makes one principle clear: not a single American taxpayer dollar should be used to purchase goods, raw materials, services tainted by Uyghur forced labor. It ensures that federal contracts, programs, and policies only go to companies that can certify their supply chains are free from this abuse. American consumers should not be complicit in human rights violations. American businesses should not profit from forced labor, and our government, your tax dollars, must never enable oppression. I urge strong support, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Florida gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. And I rise in support of H.R. 1724, the No Dollars for Uyghurs Forced Labor Act. Congress has a history of bipartisan cooperation to call out Beijing's genocide and human rights abuses against Uyghurs and members of other minority groups in Xinjiang. We passed, but our work isn't done because Beijing's repression isn't done. So, just as was done in the 118th Congress, today we should pass H.R. 1724. This bill prohibits the State Department and USAID from funding grants or contracts with companies and organizations that import products mined, produced, or manufactured in Xinjiang. The intention of this bill is to make sure that the standards we use at home when it comes to forced labor also apply to American activities abroad. I commend Representative Moran for his sustained focus on forced labor and forcefully and fully endorse the spirit of his bill. Given that this bill is being taken directly to the floor without the benefit of feedback from the State Department, however, I would ask that we work with our Senate colleagues and the administration to ensure that it is ultimately implemented in a way that is both workable and does not inadvertently impede critical State Department operations and programming. This bill is especially necessary because the Trump administration's actions have gutted U.S. leadership on these issues. Thus far, the administration has cut funding for programs that support human rights in the China context, even though Congress explicitly authorized and appropriated such funding via statute. We know the administration has cut at least $50 million for projects that focused on addressing Beijing's human rights abuses. This includes programs that were empowering Chinese advocates and disparate groups to combat transnational repression, monitoring forced labor goods and global supply chains, and promoting religious freedom. The administration is also trying to shutter Radio Free Asia as we speak, despite the fact that Radio Free Asia helped break the story about the PRC's program of detention, re-education, and forced labor in Xinjiang. The administration's opposition to Uyghur resettlement in the United States is hypocritical at best and morally reprehensible at worst. This bill is a good step for Congress to take, but President Trump is squandering American leadership and taking us backward. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, the sponsor of this legislation and a former committee member, Mr. Moran.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Mast. I rise today in strong support of the No Dollars to Uyghur Forced Labor Act. I urge my colleagues to support this critical legislation that would prohibit United States Department contracts with companies tied to forced labor in the Xinjiang region of China. Our bill would ensure that U.S. funds are not used to finance projects in partnership with companies or organizations that import products mined or manufactured in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. Many basic goods that we consider to be part of our everyday lives as Americans are produced in Xinjiang, including textiles, bricks, cotton, and polysilicon. As home to the majority of China's cotton, coal, and natural gas reserves, and representing 1/6 of China's landmass, the Xinjiang region is central to China's economy. It is considered to be the core hub for China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's primary tool to exert economic influence across the globe. China's economy relies in large part on Xinjiang, yet behind its industries lie a horrifying reality: mass detention, forced labor, and brutal oppression of the people who live there. The CCP is oppressing the Uyghur people and other ethnic minorities by detaining them in what they call re-education centers for forced labor in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region of China. Slavery in any form is morally repugnant, and America, known on the international stage as a beacon of freedom and liberty, must not be complicit in the Chinese Communist Party's genocide and oppression of the Uyghur people. The United States must push back on China not only in our words, but through our actions. Failing to do so enables the CCP to grow in strength and exert its malign influence over the world. It is past time we enforce accountability against our greatest adversary. The U.S. must act decisively against the companies that profit from these abuses and take a firm stand against totalitarian regimes. The CCP asserts its control over the Uyghur people through threats, intimidation, confinement, and physical and emotional abuse. Failing to confront China empowers gross human rights abuses and allows for the spread of such atrocities to be determined by the CCP. Our legislation will ensure that our State Department plays no part in the forced slave labor of the Uyghur people. America must continue to lead with strength and morality on the world stage and refuse to fund these brutal tactics and its cruelty. Passing this critical legislation is the first step, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maryland, you're recognized.
Prepare to close. No further speakers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
You're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1724 calls on the State Department and USAID to verify they are not funding any programs or projects that unwittingly use goods or materials made using forced labor in Xinjiang. This is a preventative measure that to ensure America's diplomacy, development, and economic engagement, and continue to make sure that America, we stay true to our values. So I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. Gentleman from Florida. He yields back his time. I'm sorry. Gentleman from Florida, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill, this debate, previous bills, they send a clear message to the Chinese Communist Party and to the world. The United States does not turn a blind eye to China's atrocities. I thank my colleague, Mr. Moran, for his leadership. We must pass this bill and say with one voice, not one more dollar. I urge my colleagues to pass this bill, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1724 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. It's the opinion of the chair, 2/3 is passed in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid to the table. From what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1316 as amended.
The clerk will report the bill, title of the bill.
H.R. 1316, a bill to amend the Export Control Reform Act of 2018 relating to licensing transparency.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the Maintaining American Superiority by Improving Export Control Transparency Act. And I wish my colleague could have picked a shorter name for it, but that's my friend, Mr. Jackson. He does good legislation, sometimes a little long-winded on the names, but export controls are a critical tool for protecting American national security. Foreign adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party are working tirelessly to steal and exploit U.S. technology. We have known this. The CCP is using its military-civil fusion strategy to fuel China's military buildup and commit human rights atrocities, just like we've spoke about on Uyghur genocide. No American service member should have to face a foreign adversary armed with U.S. technology, and no act of genocide should be enabled by American innovation. As important as export controls are to protecting American lives and values, they are only as strong as their administration and the enforcement of it. Every U.S. export control ultimately requires the government to decide on whether to approve or deny a license for the item in question. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, or the BIS, is the lead agency for administering and enforcing U.S. export controls. As export controls have become more vital to our national security, the importance of congressional oversight has only increased. The licensing data for how BIS is administering export controls can be difficult for Congress to gain access to for oversight purposes. Last Congress, the Foreign Affairs Committee worked persistently to uncover that BIS was routinely approving export control licenses for even the worst actors, such as Huawei and SMIC, as we call them. Last Congress, Foreign Affairs Committee worked to expose this in hearing after hearing, without much help from the Biden administration. Huawei and SMIC are two of the CCP's national champions and play a critical role in supporting China's military buildup and human rights abuses. It's essential that Congress has visibility into how many licenses are being approved for the worst actors on export control blacklist, known as the Entity List. This bill will improve transparency and ensure Congress is able to conduct regular oversight of how BIS is handling licenses and how effectively our export controls are being enforced. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Ronnie Jackson from Texas, and Ms. Sarah Jacobs from California for introducing this important legislation. The Foreign Affairs Committee has marked up this legislation last Congress, and it passed the committee and the House floor with strong bipartisan support. I expect it will receive the same support today. I urge my colleagues to support the Maintaining American Superiority by Improving Export Control Transparency Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
You're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1316. Over the past 6 years, export controls have become a crucial tool for our national security and foreign policy to respond to the challenges posed by Russia, China, Iran, and others. Our use of export controls have become more and more frequent and more complicated as we have started to apply novel controls in critical technology areas such as semiconductors and AI. While this change in U.S. export control policy has taken place, congressional consultation and oversight has not kept up. The bill in front of us today by Representative Jackson is an important step towards remedying this problem by calling for the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, to conduct greater transparency around license application information and conduct checks for problematic companies in arms-embargoed nations. This bill will also enable Congress to conduct better oversight to ensure that BIS licensing and enforcement processes are working properly and efficiently. This bill will ensure that the Foreign Affairs Committee is getting the information it needs on export control policy and implementation while protecting business proprietary information and allowing BIS to effectively execute its core national security mandate. However, as we add to the list of things we're asking BIS to do, it's also important that we equip BIS with the resources and staffing to meet those requirements. This administration claims that it will prioritize export controls, yet it has frozen 10% of BIS's budget. That is not keeping America safe. BIS desperately needs to revamp its outdated and inefficient IT system, which has not been updated in over 15 years. The number of license applications BIS receives per year has more than doubled in that span to over 40,000 per year. I worry that without a better IT system, reasonable requests for information like this bill will further tax BIS's limited resources. Representative Crow and Ranking Member Meeks are working on a bill to fund IT modernization for BIS. I hope that as we pass good bills like this one by Mr. Jackson and Ms. Jacobs, we also properly equip BIS so it can effectively carry out its work. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, the sponsor of this long-titled legislation, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today we are bringing a very important piece of legislation to the floor, the Maintaining American Superiority by Improving Export Control Transparency Act, a key piece of legislation to ensure our country stays ahead of our adversaries. Businesses and universities in the United States work constantly to innovate, improve, and invent the best technologies and systems in this world. This is what keeps America on the leading edge. Our nation's determination and commitment to achieving the best has allowed us to develop the best technologies in all fields, and through strategic investments under the leadership of President Trump, this will continue for many years to come. In today's era of strategic competition, Congress needs to provide the administration with the tools it needs to ensure American technologies are not falling into the hands of our adversaries. Malign actors like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran would gladly seek to use our very own goods and technologies against us, whether in military engagements or on the economic battlefield. America's open, competitive economy has allowed us to become the global leader in cutting-edge technologies, but in order to maintain this advantage, we must be able to track how American technology is used around the world. My bill, the Maintaining American Superiority by Improving Export Control Transparency Act, helps to ensure increased transparency and accountability in the export control process by creating better reporting in the licensing application process, giving critical information to both Congress and the administration. My bill creates a mechanism for tracking and reporting of export licenses and can be utilized to form a paper trail to understand where American-made technologies are going, who is using them, and how they may be getting diverted to adversarial nations. If our adversaries are benefiting from American technology, we must know exactly how that happened and who is responsible. Further, my bill will provide necessary clarity on how licensing determinations are made by producing information for each application, including the applicant, the recipient, and the compliance measures implemented to uphold export regulations. With this necessary information in one place, we will have a better understanding of where American-made technologies are going abroad, who is supposed to have them, and how we can support the administration to close gaps being exploited by our adversaries. The American free market has led to some of the most incredible technological advances of all time, so it is important that we modernize our export control process to help protect it. Export controls are a key national security tool for the administration in these increasingly dangerous times. Therefore, Congress should swiftly pass this legislation and send it to President Trump's desk. As my chairman mentioned, this bill has passed in the House unanimously in the 118th Congress. The only difference between this year's bill and last year's bill is that we have incorporated some helpful technical assistance provided by the new administration to ensure the legislation better executes the letter of the law and congressional intent. I want to thank Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Meeks for supporting this legislation and working together to see that this bill made it to the floor today. I also want to thank co-leads of this bipartisan and bicameral legislation, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, Senator Jim Banks, and Senator Mark Warner. Greater transparency and accountability in export controls is critical to national security issue that everyone should have an interest in supporting this. I urge all of my colleagues to support this critical piece of legislation that will enhance our national security and economic competitiveness while protecting American innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
No further speakers at this time. Prepared to close. The other side is. Very good.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, transparency is critical for effective congressional oversight, and Mr. Jackson's bill will allow Congress greater insight into the license application decisions and enforcement actions taken by the Bureau of Industry and Security. So notwithstanding the length of the bill, as pointed out by the chairman, I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized. The gentleman yields. Recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time. I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for working to improve transparency and congressional oversight of U.S. export controls. It's vital. That can't be overstated enough. It's vital. I urge all members to vote in favor of H.R. 1316, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1316 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2416.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2416, a bill to amend the Taiwan Allies International Protection and Enhancement Initiative Taipei Act of 2019 to provide that the United States, as a member of any international organizations, should oppose any attempts by the People's Republic of China to resolve Taiwan's status by distorting the decisions, language, policies, or procedures of the organization and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ocheski, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the Taiwan International Solidarity Act, a vital update to the Taipei Act that reflects both the realities of today's global landscape and the urgency of standing up to the Chinese Communist Party, as we've spoke about in length today. This amendment makes clear that the United States, as a participant in any international organization, must actively oppose attempts by the CCP to distort the policies, the procedures, or the language of those institutions in order to manipulate Taiwan's status. Let me be blunt, Beijing has waged a systemic campaign to erase Taiwan from the international stage. From the World Health Organization to the International Civil Aviation Organization, the CCP has bullied, bribed, and pressured global institutions and countries into sidelining Taiwan, despite Taiwan's clear qualifications and its contributions to global health, security, and commerce. Few examples illustrate the Chinese Communist Party's deceptive tactics more clearly than its distortion of UN Resolution 2758. This 2758 was adopted in 1971. The resolution recognized the People's Republic of China as the legitimate representative of China at the United Nations. It made no mention of explicit or implicit of Taiwan's status, sovereignty, or representation. Yet Beijing has deliberately misinterpreted this resolution, falsely claiming it provides international recognition of the PRC's authority over Taiwan. This misinterpretation has been weaponized to exclude Taiwan from global institutions and forums. What was intended as a procedural resolution has been cynically exploited to isolate a democratic and peaceful partner. This calculated assault on truth and freedom must not go unchallenged. The Chinese Communist Party seeks to rewrite international norms and terminology to serve its own political narrative. They deny Taiwan's voice on the world stage, not because Taiwan lacks legitimacy, but because its thriving democracy as a powerful example to the CCP's authoritarian model. This amendment ensures that the United States will not stand idly by. It affirms our commitment to actively push back against Beijing manipulative influence in global institutions. It tells our allies and our adversaries that the United States will not legitimize falsehoods about Taiwan's status or sovereignty. And Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 2416, the Taiwan International Solidarity Act, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
First, I want to thank our friend and colleague, Representative Conley, for his work in developing this bill. It's been said on this floor earlier, we know that he can't be with us today, we send our best wishes and our prayers to him and his family as he continues his courageous battle with cancer. Representative Conley is among the hardest working members of Congress and the most dedicated public servants in the United States. He's as tough as they come, and I know he's going to keep fighting. Our thoughts and prayers are truly with him. I'm pleased to support this bipartisan measure, which will strengthen U.S.-Taiwan ties, showcase our support for Taiwan, and help counter Beijing's coercive influence around the world. U.S. policy towards Taiwan remains consistent across administrations and guided by the Taiwan Relations Act. What has changed, though, is Beijing's increasingly aggressive international campaign to exclude Taiwan from the international community through intimidation, coercion, and distortion of established and well-accepted norms. To be clear, there is no justification in the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 for Taiwan's continued exclusion from international bodies. The resolution only established the government of the PRC as a representative for China at the UN. It did nothing to define or determine a role for Taiwan. This bill codifies what has long been the United States' position: to oppose Beijing's actions in misinterpreting and distorting UN Resolution 2758, and to enable the United States to empower our partners to resist Beijing's overtures or reduce or sever relations with Taiwan. Taiwan is a friend, a vibrant democracy, and a force for good in the world. And in this Congress, on a bipartisan basis, we will continue to push for its inclusion in global dialogue. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers and will continue to reserve until the gentleman yields back his time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, no further requests, and I'm prepared to close if there are no speakers.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Mr. Speaker, by reinforcing the United States' opposition to the Beijing's misinterpretation of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758, this bill sends a clear signal that the United States will not waver and that we will stand up for our friends when they are bullied. Our partners should be able to rely on U.S. support in the face of Beijing's coercion, especially in its efforts to maliciously exclude the interests of Taiwan's 24 million people in international organizations. Taiwan is a vibrant democracy that contributes to the global community, and it deserves to participate in fostering peace and cooperation. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Taiwan is not just a friend. Taiwan is a self-governing democracy, a critical economic partner, and a responsible global stakeholder. It deserves to be seen and heard and not erased and silenced. When the United States shows leadership, we know that others follow. We must lead now before the Chinese Communist Party permanently rewrites international norms. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. I want to thank Mr. Connolly for his work on this piece of legislation. I miss seeing my friend here as much as we have differences on many things. We've had many intense arguments back and forth, which I wouldn't want to argue with anybody else, so I miss seeing him here. And in that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2416? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1800.
The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 1800, a bill to repeal the sunset provision of the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Olszewski, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1800, the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act of 2025. The Iran Sanctions Act was enacted back in 1996. For 29 years, this law has acted as the cornerstone of U.S. efforts to address the Iran regime's malign influence. From its support to terrorist proxies to its dangerous nuclear program, the impact of the regime's provocative actions continues to be felt far and wide. These sanctions are more important now than ever. As this administration pursues a last-ditch effort to address the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program diplomatically, these sanctions continue to provide much-needed leverage to address the full range of Iran's malign activity. They're a vital and necessary tool not only to deny Iran all paths to a nuclear weapon and to cut off its enrichment capabilities, but also to counter Iran's malign influence abroad, including its ongoing support to terrorist proxies like the Houthis. What we see across the region and beyond is that the threat Iran poses to the United States and our partners and allies is becoming more and more entrenched. We need a policy response that is durable and shows that we are committed, day in and day out, to choking off any financial support to Iran's malign activities. That's why today the House is considering the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act, which would eliminate the upcoming 2026 sunset from the Iran Sanctions Act. We need to send Iran a clear and simple message. You cannot just wait out our sanctions. Our sanctions will not expire on some arbitrary date. The only way to make U.S. sanctions go away is to stop the sanctionable conduct and not threaten the United States' national security interests or our allies, period. The fact that we are considering this bill under suspension of rules is hugely significant. It shows that eliminating this sunset is not a partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats agree that we need durable, long-lasting, long-term pressure on Iran. And, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose is the gentleman from Maryland? The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1800, the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act of 2025, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For nearly 30 years, Congress and the executive branch have utilized the Iran Sanctions Act, or ISA, to constrict Iran's energy sector, denying the Iranian regime needed funds to grow its nefarious nuclear program and carry out state-sponsored terror activities. Originally passed into law in 1996, the ISA has been the key statutory element undergirding our sanctions infrastructure against Iran. The ISA provides secondary sanctions authority to hold third-party firms accountable for their investments in Iran as well. Since 1996, Congress has built upon this legislation multiple times and has expanded the list of transactions that are considered violation of the ISA. These sanctions, combined with additional sanctions on Iran's financial systems and petroleum transactions, as well as aggressive American diplomacy, are what drove Iran to the negotiation table to finalize the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2025, a deal that effectively prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon before it was torn up by President Trump in 2018. Today, Iran is closer to obtaining a nuclear weapon than ever before, and the Iranian regime, through its backing of terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, continues to wreak havoc throughout the Middle East. So, we must ask ourselves, under what circumstances can Congress envision abandoning our sanctions infrastructure while this Iranian regime is in power? What indications have we had since 1996 that this regime is interested in changing its nature and becoming a productive and peaceful member of the international community? While it is exceedingly rare that Congress would waive sunsets, and I would support an extended authorization, the failure of Iran to change for decades speaks for itself. The ISA is the only major Iran sanction statute that contains a sunset provision. And in general, sunset provisions have value, forcing Congress to reevaluate and reconsider sanctions to adjust to new situations. However, even in the instance a new Iran deal is reached and successfully implemented, I believe we would want this sanctions infrastructure still in place, just as it was under the JCPOA, so that Iran and the international community knows what awaits them if progress is not made or promises are not kept. Repealing the sunset provision of the ISA is also an issue of checks and balances. Losing congressional authority of this critical sanctions infrastructure would effectively cede more authority to the executive branch, which has already proven to be more than willing to act unilaterally and without congressional oversight in carrying out executive actions. Passing the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act of 2025 would send an important message about Congress's role in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy towards Iran and, in sum, serves American national security interests. I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the sponsor of this bill, Mr. McKenzie.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support my bill, H.R. 1800, the Solidify Iran Sanctions Act of 2025. At a time when our country is working to achieve peace and de-escalate military conflicts in multiple locations around the world, we must remain vigilant about the ongoing threats posed by some of our long-term adversaries. Iran has a well-established record of destabilizing the Middle East and threatening its neighbors. The government of Iran is manufacturing weapons, including drones, acquiring conventional weapons through malign actors, and supporting those actors around the world by funneling weapons and financial support. They do it through their terrorist proxy network throughout the Middle East. These actions directly threaten U.S. personnel and our allies in the region. Iran-backed militias have killed and injured U.S. troops stationed on bases in the Middle East, including an attack on a U.S. base in Jordan on January 28, 2024, which killed 3 American soldiers and injured dozens more. We also know that Iran is continuing to enrich uranium and manufacture long-range missiles, which together pose an unprecedented threat to regional stability. As the current administration works to achieve the total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program, it's critical that we give them the tools that they need in order to enforce their policy of maximum pressure. In order to achieve peace and stability in the region, we have to remind Tehran that they will not be able to grow, prosper, or effectively do business until they end their nuclear ambitions and stop supporting terrorism. Today's legislation achieves that, empowering our administration during negotiations and putting Iran on notice. This bill removes the sunset clause from the Iran Sanctions Act of 1996, making it permanent law. The original act mandates sanctions on individuals and entities involved in Iran's energy sector and its efforts to develop weapons of mass destruction. By eliminating the expiration date, we ensure that these sanctions remain a steadfast component of our national security strategy. The Iran Sanction Act has been a cornerstone in our efforts to deter Iran's malign activities, and this legislation will show our clear resolve on that issue. We must send this message. The United States will not tolerate Iran's support of terrorism, its pursuit of nuclear weapons, or its support for attacks on international vessels and American service members. I urge my colleagues to support this vital legislation. By voting for the Iran Sanctions Act of 2025 and solidifying it, we affirm our resolve to confront Iran's threats and protect Americans' interests and allies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida.
Reserve.
Reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Prepared to close.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers. I'm prepared to close.
All right, great. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this bill sends a clear signal that the United States will continue to use every tool at its disposal necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, deter it from carrying out state-sponsored terrorist activities, and defend American interests and that of our allies and partners in the Middle East. Preserving Congress's ability to ensure sanctions against Iran is critical to maintaining congressional sanction authorities and protecting U.S. national security. I hope my colleagues will join me and support this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on October 7, the world witnessed the horror of Iran-backed terrorism as Hamas brutally murdered over 1,200 innocent people in Israel. Iran has been sponsoring Hamas for years. They were sponsoring terrorists on the battlefield that I participated in, and many of our colleagues. It's just been sponsoring Hezbollah and the Houthis to attack Israel just over this past weekend, amassing ballistic missiles, building armed drones, expanding its nuclear program at an alarming rate. The Iran threat is wide-ranging and multifaceted. The Iran Sanction Act is the foundation of our tools to combat that threat. We know that this threat isn't going away anytime soon, so let's stop fooling ourselves that a sunset makes any sense to these provisions. I urge my colleagues to join me in bringing our statutes in line with the strategic reality on the ground. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1800? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 today.